Modern neuroscience tells us that instead of writing down things we're thankful for in a journal, simply listening to and connecting with positive stories about people can better help shift our immune system into balance. It can help us move from a state of constant anxiety towards motivation. So 3 days a week, I'm sharing stories we can feel good about. Mondays, you'll hear a story from the past to be thankful for. On Wednesdays, I'll tell an inspiring story from the present. And Fridays, you'll head into the weekend with a story to keep you optimistic about our future. Hi, I'm Chris. Welcome to My Good 3. All right, let's go. Hey everyone, I'm Chris, your host, and I'm really excited to share the first episode of My Good 3. We're going to kick it off with a story from the past. This is a story about loving your country and laying it all on the line to protect the things you believe in. Around 2 weeks ago, on the anniversary of 9/11, I was sitting in my living room with my 11-year-old, and it had finally come time to talk about the details of what had happened on that day in 2001. We watched videos on YouTube, the planes making impact, first responders in action, people covered in debris, navigating Manhattan after the buildings collapsed. We looked at footage of the reaction by then President George W. Bush as he sat in front of a room full of school children and received the news. We saw pictures of the chaos at the Pentagon and found examples of solidarity across the country in the wake of the tragedy. My son contemplated the breadth of what he had just seen and didn't say much. I thought he'd want to get into more details, but instead, he focused on something the cameras didn't catch. He wanted to know more about the fourth plane and why it had crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and not into another important building. He was old enough for the details, so I told him the story. I told him there were a lot of heroes on that day, in New York and in Washington, D.C., to include Wells Crowther, the 24-year-old equities trader wearing his trusty red bandana to cover his mouth from the smoke. Wells saved many lives by taking charge, motivating people to look after one another, then leading people to the South Tower stairwell, carrying others, and then returning into the burning section of the tower over and over until its collapse. There was also Richard Rescorla, the Morgan Stanley Vice President of Security, whose calming voice sang "God Bless America" over a bullhorn as he led people to safety. He was last seen climbing the stairs to make one last sweep for any remaining Morgan Stanley employees. And these are just two examples from New York. When it comes to Flight 93, it all starts with Todd Beamer, a 32-year-old salesman, husband and father from New Jersey, and his phone call from an airline phone that connected with an Airphone operator. He immediately told her what was going on, how the flight had been hijacked, the crew had been injured, one passenger killed, and several hijackers with box cutters were locked in the cockpit, while another was in the back of the plane with a bomb strapped to his waist. He told her that the hijackers had just turned the plane to the east toward Washington, D.C. Several other passengers had just made phone calls to their families, so by that time, the passengers knew that 2 planes had already crashed into the World Trade Center buildings and 1 into the Pentagon. A small group of passengers, including Beamer, Mark Bingham, Todd Burnett, and Jeremy Glick, as well as other passengers and several flight attendants, decided they weren't just going to sit there and have the plane they were on crash into another building in D.C., so they huddled together and voted on a plan to confront the hijackers. Complete strangers of different backgrounds, religions, races, and political beliefs who 30 minutes earlier were buckling into their seats preparing to read their books or work on their laptops, were suddenly face to face under dire circumstances in a fight for their lives. For Todd Beamer, it was a life with a wife and 2 young children and a third on the way. They all had families. Some people might freeze in fear, sit back down, close their eyes, and pray that it all worked out. These weren't those kind of people. A plan was set, and after sharing a message to his family with the Airphone operator and reciting a quick prayer, Todd Beamer, in 2 words, set the group's plan into action. Let's roll. What happened next is hard to say exactly, but the flight data recorder caught enough to conclude that the group stormed the cockpit, battled with the hijackers for control of the plane, and in that battle, the Boeing 757 ended up in a descent that was unrecoverable. Flight 93 tragically crashed, upside down, in a Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania field, killing 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers. As I sat on my living room couch with my son, it fell silent as he contemplated the decisions that were made, the actions that were taken, and the resulting loss of life. He finally looked at me and said, "So they did it knowing that they might die, but they took the risk because they knew they would die if they didn't." And I said, "Yes, essentially. They had to make a tough decision, but with the information they had, it was the only decision." He replied, "They're heroes." And I said, "Yes, they're heroes. And as Americans, we should all be thankful." With our busy lives, it's easy to let September 11th come and go. But on this September 11th, I'm glad things slowed down for a minute so I could be reminded how lucky we are to live in a country with people like the heroes of United Airlines Flight 93. Thank you for listening. I realize this podcast won't be successful without your help. So if you'd like to rate it, or better yet, review it, wherever you get your podcasts, that would really help. And if you're on Instagram, go to @mygood3, THREE, to vote each episode up or down. I'm also excited to read more Good 3 stories from listeners. So just go to our website, mygood3.com, and submit a story of your own from the past, present, or future, or all three, and maybe I'll use it in an episode. Thanks again. Here's to hoping My Good 3 can set the stage for your good week.